Alrighty, well, welcome everyone to our app prep program for our primary application submission strategy and what to do afterwards. It is application day, and I know a lot of you are getting ready to submit. So I hope that we can talk today about some myths and hopefully also calm some fears, as well as along with some strategies. And along with the strategy, of course, comes in the timeline of when to do things. If you do have any questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat. My name is Karen Draper, and I'm a staff advisor at the Health Professions Advising Office. I've had the opportunity to see many different cycles as a staff advisor, and I always look forward to supporting our applicants every year, whether it's just figuring out strategies and school lists, or maybe we're doing writing together, like your personal statement or experiences. If you happen to be on our app prep program listserv, you actually already have my email because I'm the one that usually sends those out every Tuesday. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us as we dive into some strategies. Okay. I do like to shout out our advising opportunities, as not everyone knows about them. And I've luckily had the chance to meet some folks recently at drop-ins from watching our recordings in the past or just coming to these sessions. So let's say you have some quick application questions or transcripts or letters of rec situations. You're actually more than welcome to call us during our open hours for our express advising and talk with one of our available advisors there. Or even if you just have questions and you're not sure where to go, we can help direct you there as well. And maybe it is a tougher question. And so we'll say, come on over to drop-ins. No problem. We also host Zoom drop-ins Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at the times that you see on the screen here, also available on our website. And any question and any topic is always welcome at drop-ins. Sometimes applicants wonder, well, will I have enough time to get through my questions at drop-ins? Obviously, that's a great question. And honestly, yes, because most of the time we're meeting applicants consistently at drop-ins. Maybe that's every day for a while or maybe once a week. And even if we went to 3 sessions back to back, that's already going to be 45 minutes kind of tackling your questions, which is going to be more than, of course, a 30-minute appointment. So I always recommend, if you can schedule 30-minute sessions in advance, go for it. And also come to Zoom drop-ins. You can definitely come to both. There's no limitations on that. Any questions about drop-ins? Feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute. Okay, and just a friendly reminder, in case you haven't seen it on our email newsletter or applicant listserv, extended drop-in hours will begin next week, where we do add an additional 30 minutes at the end. So Tuesday will be from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. starting next week. Okay, jumping into our content for today, we do also like to give that friendly reminder. HPA serves all students and alumni from UC Davis, and we give the same services to alumni as if you were a student. So, congratulations to the class of 2023. Just, stay connected, and, if you remember your student ID, you're going to have access to everything as if you were a student here, in terms of HPA services. So usually the first thing to come up with submission strategies, is it a truth or myth I have to submit the first day to be early? What do you all think? The first answer, I already got it. It is a myth. Yes. And it is a pretty common myth where you'll see it all over the place that you have to be the first day or the first week or something crazy. And it's really just not true. Every cycle, all the staff and us, we see time and time again, you don't have to be submitting the first day to be early. Most people aren't ready by today. And so digging into that truth, it is a myth. If we're submitting within the first 4 to 6 weeks and having it be ready, that is still an early time frame. So we are considering timeline. So, from now till mid-July or so, but also submitting ready. So making sure that, do you have that time to be meeting with an HPA advisor during drop-ins or appointments to be getting those revisions in? Any thoughts or questions on this? Ooh, good question. Is August considered really late? And just to double check, are we talking about for like allopathic medicine, or what health field are we talking about? Allopathic medicine. That is a tad on the later side. We do have to also consider, we would still have to do secondaries and things like that. And we would also have to go through the verification process, which we'll talk about more in depth later. But verification does take about 4 to 6 weeks. And so we would, if someone was planning to submit in August, adding 4 to 6 weeks onto that, that would be September or October when schools would be taking a look at that. And so we always like to let applicants know it's always up to you when you want to apply. HPA's job, and of course my job, is help to give you information, give you advice when you want it, but it'll ultimately be to support whatever decision that you make and whatever makes sense for your life. So we could always do a one-on-one timeline to figure out what's kind of going on and what makes sense for you. No problem. Any other thoughts or questions on this? That was a good question. Okay, and of course, if you come up with questions along the way, the chat is a great place to do that. The next question is, or the next kind of statement is, I can use my Davis official transcript for transferred coursework. True or false? Ooh, good. Yes, it is false. So for every higher education institution you attend, you will have to request the official transcript to be sent to yourself and to whatever application service or services that you're using. And so even if you took art history or, comic book art or something like that in high school and you took it at a community college over the summer, still going to count, and we would still need to send those official transcripts over because we don't want that to hold back any verification things. Any thoughts or questions on this? Okey-dokey. So jumping into the strategies, just a friendly, vocab reminder, rolling admissions versus deadline admissions. So allopathic med schools, dental schools, and a handful of other ones, a lot of them are on rolling admissions, which means they're not waiting for the deadline to review your application. They're going to be reviewing them as they receive them. And so logistically, what that means is at the beginning of the cycle, all of their seats are open, and then they start giving out interviews and acceptances. So the number of seats that they have, basically go down over time. So strategically, it does make sense to apply early in the cycle. So June or early July for most people. But also we do want to apply ready, right? We don't want to just hit submit just to hit submit. We want to make sure that you're feeling confident and competitive in your application. Deadline admissions means that they do wait for that deadline to review applications. Some nursing schools are like this, or PA schools and vet schools, but this is something you'd always want to double check their website for. For deadline admission based schools, we don't encourage hitting submit just on the deadline. You could do that, but we do encourage applying a few weeks in advance just in case you need to fix something or they get back to you and say they're missing something. So giving a 3 to 4 week buffer is usually good for deadline based schools. And again, submitting early and ready is always encouraged. And when you are submitting, sometimes folks think that they have to submit all of their schools at once. And this can definitely be overwhelming, particularly for our pre-med folks here today, because the average pre-med from Davis applies to about 20 to 30 schools. And that would mean you would be receiving potentially 20 to 30 secondaries all at once. And I don't know about you, but that's a lot of writing to do all at once. And a strategy that we've seen be pretty successful, and I just saw there's like a gasp emoji, and yes, that is a lot of writing in a lot of schools. And so to kind of prepare, we do encourage, just using the tool to be verified. So just submitting to one school to start the verification process. And then we can continue to add schools over time. And we do want to get secondaries from every school that you apply to, if they have a secondary. Most schools do, but the reason why that can be important is because oftentimes we need that in order to move on in their process. And so again, kind of just submitting with one school, and then that will start the verification process. And verification is when the application system or AMCAS or COMIS or whoever, they are verifying or double checking that they agree with you based on the official transcript that you gave them and what you input for the coursework. So do they agree with you on the categories? Do they agree that you input the right letter grade and the number of units? All of those kinds of things. That's the only thing that they're double checking. Once that they're done with that, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks. That is when you're then verified. And that is when schools actually start to receive your application. Schools can't receive it before you're verified. And so what we encourage is, again, you just need to submit on one school to be verified. And then during the time of verification, we're going to be working on pre-writing those secondaries, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then once you're done with that one school, we can be submitting to about 5 to 6 schools or sending it in batches. And then once you're almost done with those 5 to 6 schools, in roughly 2 weeks or so, then we can be submitting the next batch of schools. That way we can be handling these writing in batches instead of, again, getting things all at once. And so sometimes people ask, well, which schools should I submit first to? Obviously a good question. And that kind of comes down to your school list when you're talking with an advisor about that. We usually encourage submitting on the schools that, maybe your dream school first, or really the schools you feel the most competitive for. So that way we can maximize the earliness for those schools. Another good school, in my opinion, to submit to first, or actually, I'm sorry, not to submit to first, but to work on their secondary first, is UC San Diego, if you decide to apply to them, because their secondary is the classic writing your autobiography. And it can feel like really overwhelming, and sometimes applicants leave it for last. But I encourage working on it first, because oftentimes I learn a lot of new things about my applicants. And we can often use that writing for other secondaries as well. And so we usually kind of submit that towards the middle once we get the ball rolling. So great question. So when do you get secondaries? This is where things get a little messy. So for allopathic med schools, you receive secondaries after you submit, after you're verified. But there are a lot of old prompts online that we can just find. And that'll be the only time you have permission to kind of, go on like Student Doctor Network or Reddit or places like that to get them. Or we can just be using general prompts as well, which we'll kind of talk about. And then for like dental schools, osteopathic medicine, a lot of nursing, PA, vet, a lot of those schools actually embed secondaries in the primary application. So every school will be a little bit different. Schools often recycle their secondary questions. And even if they didn't, even if they did change it, chances are the question that they asked is similar to another one, so we were recycling anyways, or that we can still reuse that writing somewhere else. Generally, how soon after you are verified do you get secondary prompts? Pretty much the next day. And that is different from submission, because again, you have to be verified before schools actually start to receive that information. But I want to double check. Does that clarify the question there? Oh, I just saw an unmute. Do you want to unmute?
Do they give secondaries to everyone, or do they only give secondaries to people who they like?
Ooh, good question. Who gets secondaries? Every school will be different. Most schools give it to everyone. Some schools are more selective, and they like, again, very few schools like kind of review the primary first before they decide, or they have like another screening tool, like the number of volunteer hours or something like that. But most schools give it to everyone. Any other questions? Okay. And so again, kind of doing it in batches, once you submit that next 5 to 6 schools, you're gonna get, if they send that secondary to everyone, you're gonna roughly get it within 24 hours or whenever that system is updated again, basically. But they usually do update batches every day. We do encourage completing secondaries by August or September or sooner, if possible, because this is, really a marathon. So, the race isn't necessarily to hit submit first. The race is to have a complete application first. And so once you paid for the secondary, submitted the secondary, have letters of rec and all the other stuff like MCAT and all that. And if they require like a Casper or another exam, that's when you have a complete application. And that's usually when most schools are going to be screening applicants. Most schools don't review primary and then send secondary. Most are waiting for everything all at once. Any other follow-up questions? Okay, you guys are doing really good in the chat and unmuting. Definitely continue doing that. So kind of going back to maximizing verification, it's going to typically be about 4 to 6 weeks. So using this time for secondary pre-writing, we do have that secondaries video up already with very common prompts. You could also be looking at what did the schools you're applying to do last year as a basis as well. And then we can start editing and revising those together at drop-ins. If you have any extra tests to take, like Casper or Kira or AAMC preview, now after you submit can be a pretty good time to take it as well. Friendly reminder that, sometimes schools don't prompt you to just take it. Sometimes you have to check on their website or in the portal for the application system, it says what you have to do. So kind of keeping track of all of that on a spreadsheet is usually pretty helpful. While you're being verified, also a good time to be, attending events hosted by HPA or even health professional schools and associations. We'll talk more about that later today. And sometimes people are using this time to also find more schools to apply to or solidify their school list. I do give the fair warning that those who are applying to DO schools, usually in June, if you're submitting, verification only takes about 1 to 2 days. And that can be a little jarring if you were expecting, 4 weeks to work on secondaries and then you're getting it, very fast. And again, some DO schools actually just embed their secondaries in the application system. Any thoughts or questions on maximizing verification before we talk a little bit about school list stuff? Okie dokie. How are we feeling right now? Kind of talking about that, maybe, potential strategy for submission. Any thoughts, feelings, questions? And you can, of course, DM as well. You don't have to put it to everyone. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Someone did say it does feel less stressful not having to submit all of them all at once. And monetarily, it could also make sense as well if you'd rather kind of pay it off a little bit more over time versus a big sticker price all at once. Okay, so kind of approaching school list, and I include this in the strategy for submission because I think that this goes overall towards the application strategy. And so I usually like to ask, and this is a question for the chat as well, would you rather throw a handful of darts all at once, or would you rather throw them one at a time? Yeah, one at a time tends to be the general consensus. And the reason why I bring this up is because sometimes, well, kind of taking a step back, there's a million and one ways to apply to medical school, and choosing the way that makes the most sense to you. You got to do what you got to do. Um, but how we encourage kind of approaching the school list is to be doing research into schools individually to find schools that fit for you versus kind of just applying just to see how it goes or just applying to all these schools and not knowing too much about them, because the more research we do now while you're working on your school list, I promise you, the easier it will be when you are doing those secondaries. So doing it up front will help save time and energy. We do talk a lot about how to create strategic school lists or what are things to keep track of um, when you are creating that spreadsheet. And we know again that this can feel overwhelming. And I'm not saying go to all 160 plus medical school websites. That would be insane. First, we're going to talk about in that video, like how do we narrow things down by location? And then how do we narrow things down by like kind of like residency along with that? And then we'll start to talk about, well, what are you passionate about? So for example, if you're really into like community service or community outreach, then we would be, kind of using Google terms for that, like medical schools with volunteer hour requirements, because you probably need that, or medical schools with community outreach programs, or if you are invested in serving the unhoused or having research as a requirement. We talk about all of these things and building a school list that fits you and your strengths, your past experiences, and your future goals versus just applying to schools just to apply to them. But again, that's just what we encourage. It will always be up to you what you want to do, and we're here to support whatever it is that your choice is. So secondaries. Why do you think we recommend pre-writing secondaries? And I know I've kind of talked about it already, but do you have any thoughts or questions on that? Yeah, thanks for putting that in the chat. Avoid rushing to submit. Yes. Some of you might feel like you're already writing a lot now for your personal statement or experiences, and you are, right? And this is probably a lot of writing and you haven't done in a while, but secondaries becomes usually even more writing because it's up to each school how many essays are they going to have you write. So oftentimes, we are helping avoid rushing to submit, and yes, definitely being more prepared and helping with the quality. So I encourage, after you submit, please don't go away. Let's continue revising writing at drop-ins together. Definitely take a little bit of a break if you need it, but this is a time to keep the ball rolling and work on things together. So kind of the timeline again, aiming to submit by August or September or sooner. The sooner that we're submitting secondaries and completing your application, the sooner schools are usually screening your application. And then again, pre-writing, we do have that secondaries video on our YouTube channel, and you can again research common questions as one approach, or you can just go back to the specific schools you're applying to and see what did they do last year. Which I know this is kind of all review from our earlier conversation. Any last minute thoughts or questions about secondaries before we move on to interviews? Okay, so interviews. So we do encourage, after you've done with the secondaries, probably gonna need to take a break. Definitely okay. But we do encourage preparing for interviews right after secondaries. Before you might even start receiving invites. So why do you think we recommend preparing for them early? And this answer might surprise some folks. Yes. Ooh, we did get the right answer. There can be a short turnaround time from the invite to the actual interview date. So schools can give you as much notice as a few months. Great, we're swimming in time. Or they can give you as little notice as like a day or two, or even like the following week. So they can email you if they have a lot of time. But sometimes, let's say a couple of people drop out of the interview, they get sick or can't make it or whatever. Um, oftentimes they can actually call applicants and say, "Hey, can you come to this interview tomorrow?" So turnaround time can be super quick, and this is why we do host our interview week in August. And that's our time. The first 4 days, they're workshop based, learning about how do we prepare for interviews, online interviews, the different types, multiple mini interviews or MMIs. And then on the 5th day, we use that time to do a mock interview with our applicants. And that's your time to, be in the zone of interview prep. If you're able to, you can get dressed up or be in the place that you would plan to be for a virtual interview. And we typically have many interviewers who are staff at HPA or even our partners on and off campus, and we'll each ask a different question, and that's your chance to get individual feedback. So we have interview week in August, which will let the applicant prep listserv know about, as well as our general HPA newsletter know about within the next week or so. And in fall, we'll also have a couple of dates for mock interview days as well. And of course, I believe next week's session for app prep will be a little bit about how to prepare for interviews as well. Okay, how are we doing so far? Thumbs up, have questions? This is just a check-in. Thumbs up. Okay, that's good. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to send it to me. I did get a DM earlier. It's a great question. I will tackle it after I turn off the recording. Okay, so kind of the next question I have for you all. Have you heard of an interest email before? Ooh, I hear a couple of no's and I hear a yes. Thanks for sharing. For the folks that said yes, do you mind unmuting or even putting in the chat what you think it is? So yeah, this kind of goes by a lot of different names. Sometimes you might hear it as like update email. But basically the goal is the same. We just want schools to know we're still interested in them and we would still like to interview. So update email, oftentimes we are sharing specifically about an update that you've had to your application. So maybe you've started a new job, maybe you've been promoted, or maybe you've started volunteering at a new place, or maybe you finally got published, maybe it was in progress before. Whatever it is, it's basically just to give them an update and to still say, hey, I'm still interested in your school, and to say that you still want an interview. An interest email is basically like you don't have any updates, nothing has really changed. And so it's focusing on, hey, I'm still interested in you. Can I have an interview? And letter of intent is very different. That's oftentimes sent much later in the cycle to express that you would attend their school if you were offered admission. So the letter of intent is often used for folks who have interviewed and then been placed on the wait list. Pretty much for most health professional schools, you do need to complete an interview in order to be ultimately accepted into their program. So this becomes interest emails, update emails. This is really a strategy for our out-of-state schools. Because as you might imagine, a lot of out-of-state schools, sometimes they see our applicants and say, oh, California, if they get in somewhere else, they're not going to want to come and play with me. And so sometimes they just like leave it off to the side for a little bit. And for the schools that do accept emails or updates in their portal, this is a really great way of showing them, hey, I didn't just put you on my list for, you know, any old reason. I strategically really like your school. I think we're a good match because of XYZ reasons. And sometimes people wonder, well, doesn't like my secondary do that? And yes, it does. But, you know, anyone can just be sending these secondaries, but to show them that you're taking extra time and effort into writing these emails can make a pretty big difference. Every year here at HPA, we encourage applicants to do this, and they tend to get a lot of interviews because of this. Otherwise, they can be overlooked. And unfortunately, sometimes people ask, well, what about those in-state schools? And, you know, most in-state schools know that California applicants do want to stay in California. So it's not really a strategy that works for them because they already know that about you, unfortunately. And the UCs typically don't accept any communication for like just, you know, their own admissions processes reasons. So usually they don't accept that communication, unfortunately. So again, update emails or emails of interest strategy, mostly for out-of-state schools. We're going to be sending them after your application is complete. So after you've already done secondaries and letters of rec and all of that good stuff, and we'd be sending it 4 to 6 weeks after that completion kind of deadline. So in that tracking sheet for your school list, you can be keeping track of, well, when did you submit the secondary? If you do have a specific admissions committee person's email, you can always address them or have the email also be sent to them. The goal is to be brief and concise. We can save content for future emails. Usually the first email that we send is right after attending the pre-health conference in mid-October, which we'll talk about later. So here's a quick example. Take a moment to get out your phone, you know, take a picture, or of course you can always rewatch the recording. But, you know, I'm sure the first thing you might have noticed is the brevity. You know, admissions folks are really busy. And so making sure that we get to the point and being just direct and specific with your reasons can be really helpful. You know, they don't unfortunately really have time to be reading super long essays, which is why, again, we can be spreading out this content. And letters of intent. Again, this is usually much later in the cycle. You know, we don't encourage submitting these during this calendar year for like medical schools, dental schools, because it's really too early for them. This cycle is still pretty early during this calendar year, and they could discard that email. And instead, we can just send an interest email instead if we are asking for an interview. We do want to be careful with how we craft this letter, as sometimes it can cause more damage than help. Unfortunately, if, you know, we do send it and they really don't like it, they could, you know, just deny people based off of that, which we don't want to happen. And it only happens in special circumstances, but, you know, I imagine we don't want that to happen. We encourage only sending letters of intent to one school. A letter of intent is basically saying that I would like to marry you, and we don't want to be telling a whole bunch of schools that I want to marry you, right? We only want to send that to one school. Yeah. I like to kind of use that, or like the Bachelor analogy of like, we're only giving a rose to one person at the end of the season. We can't be playing multiple fields because they could talk to each other, and we don't want them finding out about each other, right? This is, again, letters of intent are best only sent if you have been on the wait list after you've been interviewed, and sending it in April/Mayish and afterwards. Right after the interview, that's the time to just say thank you, and then kind of letting them do their thing. You know, kind of going back to that analogy of if we ask someone to marry them and they're like, oh, just give them some time, right? Because they have a lot going on usually. And so this is an example of how it could look. Different schools have different feelings. Some schools like long ones, some ones just prefer short ones, and some of them don't accept letters of intent. So always kind of being aware and cautious of what do schools prefer. And you can always hear about those things like on their website, in their portal, but really kind of going to info sessions and events that they're at. Which leads us to kind of connecting with schools. So HPA, we do often host schools for virtual or in-person info sessions. So staying connected to our email newsletter is always a great way. And these schools that are doing events with us, it's because they want to get to know you. They want to get to know our students. And that's a great time to ask kinds of these questions or one-on-one questions. For example, we do host the summer boot camps. And so sometimes applicants wonder, well, do I have to go to the whole thing to just attend the ones I want? Absolutely not. We know that most applicants wouldn't go to most of the summer boot camp sessions, and instead you can pick and choose which sessions you do go to. So for example, the virtual school visits for the summer pre-med boot camp could be a great event for applicants to go to. If you haven't submitted a secondary for a school yet and you go to an event by them, totally put it in that secondary. You're showing them your investment and your interest in them. And oftentimes you can learn a lot of new things about them that you might not be able to get from their website. Again, this is a chance to ask good questions and help you stand out. If you go to the HPA website and you search up maximizing info sessions, we do have an article and we do expand more about how to ask good questions. And then, of course, the pre-health conference, which we'll spend more time talking about later, is often a chance to get interviews. And sometimes it's scheduled in advance. I've also had applicants say, oh, I'm going to have an interview with the school later today or tomorrow morning because of the pre-health conference. We're at 10 minutes till, so I just want to double check. Any thoughts, questions, or feelings to share? Okay, you guys are doing great in the chat again, by the way. Definitely feel free to keep it coming. And we will, again, kind of do more events as well in the future. Things kind of come up all the time. Sometimes, admissions just want to do events with us and we end up just adding it to our calendar. So again, staying connected to our general email newsletter and our applicant listserv is always a great way to do that. And we already did talk about interview week coming up in August and then again in fall quarter. So spotlight on the pre-health conference. It's actually the largest pre-health event in the nation, and it happens right here at Davis. Every year we have attendees from across California and actually across the nation come to this event because it's just not available. This opportunity just isn't available where they're at. So hopefully that you all can kind of save the date and take some time to come back up to Davis if you've graduated or if you're sticking around in the area, come on by. We do anticipate having over 200 exhibitors at our pre-health fair in the morning, with representation from 20 different health fields. And the exhibitors at the fair are often the deans of admission or the people making the decisions. They often also come every year, so it's also a chance to, form those connections or kind of continue building those relationships. And last year we had over 70 medical schools. And again, all of these schools, they want to talk to the people coming to this conference. So they want to talk to you, they want to get to know you and to put a face to the name. Again, a lot of our students get interviews because of coming to conference and being able to make a positive impression. So registration is currently open. UC Davis students and alumni do get a discount. So you can always select that option. So the second half of the day are the workshop sessions. There's going to be 3 hours of workshops and each hour has unique sessions. Some good sessions to be on the lookout for are presentations hosted by schools or admissions panels. Getting to know more about your school that hopefully you're going to get an interview for to help you prepare for interview day. But also, sessions hosted by, doctors or health professionals. Whether you're exploring your own health field that you're interested in and learning more about the options or opportunities there, or you could also use this time to learn about another health profession. And sometimes applicants wonder, well, how is that going to help me? And, just a friendly reminder that you are a part of a healthcare team, or you will be a part of a healthcare team. You're not going to be just saving people or helping people in isolation. And it's also important to be able to understand, well, what do other members of part of the team do? What is their role? And oftentimes when I meet applicants that do have a strong understanding of that, they often do interview better because they have a much clearer view of what is their scope of practice or what are their goals. And also, how does that fit in with the other team members as well? So I think maturity plays a role. And these are some pictures from last year. So again, registration is open now. So I'll kind of leave that up in case there are any questions about pre-health conference or the strategies we've talked about so far. I will also say that last year we did have to open up a wait list. And unfortunately, not everyone got off the wait list. So we do encourage getting your ticket as soon as possible, if you can, in order to kind of just save the date, block it off the calendar, and save your seat at the same time. This year, it does look like we are selling tickets faster than last year, and so we also can't guarantee a wait list will open either. But I always hope to see as many Aggies as possible, because this event is also hosted by Aggies, our leadership team, our UC Davis students and alumni, and it's also co-hosted by the HPA office. And so the schools that we invite, it's, with you all in mind, along with the workshops. This is kind of the conclusion to my presentation today. So I do want to thank everyone for coming. If you do have, more questions, feel free to put it in the comments, but also coming into our Zoom drop-ins as well. I'm going to pause the recording and then we'll continue on.